Have you ever heard of all the supposedly wonderful benefits of gratitude practice and immediately thought to yourself, it seems a little sugar-coated? That skeptical, cynical voice comes in, and we kind of want to distance ourselves from the toxic positivity of, especially like the new age spiritually kind of movement. Well, if that's the case for you, I think you're going to really enjoy this video, where I'll talk you through what I consider to be an approach to gratitude for skeptics. Now, for context, I don't know about you, but historically, I have had kind of a melancholic, depressive disposition. And so when I hear a lot of these ideas that circulate in the spiritual communities of the positive psychology movement, I'm a little wary of those things. And I'm wary of these things for a particular reason. And this goes into an idea in the psychoanalytic world we might consider magical substitution. Quite often, when people are unable to really come to terms with the difficulty of an experience, they will just swap the experience out for something altogether different. For example, rather than face the hardship and the genuine pain of a traumatic loss, something like that, they'll just jump immediately to the silver lining of the thing. And it's like, yeah, there perhaps is some good and there is a silver lining, there is an upside. There's always a gain to every cost and a cost to every gain. But if we're too quick in skirting past the difficulty of our experiences, we fail to develop the wisdom that they afford us. And I suspect that's what accounts for so much of the shallow, superficial quality to some of these things. And personally, I like depth. If that means I have to face the hard thing and really like dive into the muck of the experience, so be it. What I don't want to do is rob myself of an opportunity for wisdom. So just it occurs to me, a funny story exemplifying this. When I was homeless, someone very close to me, I was pouring out how difficult this experience was for me. Someone very close to me said, well, the upside of this is maybe this will help you develop more compassion and appreciation for the difficulty of other people going through homelessness. And I was like, yeah. And like you're you're not hearing what's happening right now. Like it was truly a bizarre experience. I was baffled at the lack of empathy in that particular exchange. Anyway, good experience of magical substitution there, or the substitution by magical thinking, when we just scoot past all of the real agony in this experience and jump immediately to the silver lining. Let's not do that. It's worth mining our experiences for all of the value that they have available for us. So here's where this gratitude for skeptics idea came from. As I mentioned before, I dispositionally in my past, I've been pretty melancholic, pretty depressive, and I was dating someone for quite a while who was very interested in gratitude practices. And before night, she would go through and do a gratitude journal. And she would ask me, roll over in bed and ask, so what are you grateful for today? And this, at the time, this is when I was like deep in a depressive pit, one of the worst experiences of depression in my life. And I couldn't really come up with anything. And I don't know how that sounds to you, actually. I have some ideas about how that sounds, but maybe if you're no stranger to depression yourself, you get that when you're in the pit, it's really hard to see much of any glimmer of light around you. So at the time, for months, I couldn't come up with anything other than, well, not dead yet. And night after night after night after night, that was all I could come up with. When she would ask, what are you grateful for? It was a stretch. I really had to try and find something. And all I could come up with was, I'm not dead yet. And look, maybe I was blind to all of the other good things in my life. In hindsight, I think that I was. I think that I actually was failing to see a lot of good that was going on. Hurt in particular. But at the time, that was the reality of my experience. It was all that I could come up with. So here's what I want to suggest to you as possible inroads to gratitude for skeptics. Rather than turn yourself toward all of the good things available to you, what I want to suggest to you is an inversion of the question. And that's this: why are you not worse off? Take a thorough searching inventory right now. No matter how bad things might be for your life currently, why are you not worse off? And if you're watching this right now, we can maybe assume a couple of things. You have access to an internet connection, you have a reliable power grid, I would imagine, have four walls and a roof, probably have access to clean running water, food. These are just the basic things. It's so easy to take for granted. Having at times not had access to those things, by God, I'm appreciative of those things in my life currently. So I wonder, what about the case for you? Why are you not worse off? Rather than have us look around for all the good things and the silver lining, let's turn our attention to the floor. There is some existential ground of being that is keeping you from bottoming out even further, right? What I mean is that in the absence of some of those things, you could take this really bad situation and find yourself in hell. Yeah. So let's consider, what is the ground that your life rests upon? And at the outset, maybe you just take stock of it. You don't have to celebrate the thing. You don't have to be all rainbows and butterflies about it, but you can at least acknowledge its presence in your life. And maybe even turn an eye toward what you imagine its absence would look like. That, I believe, is the start of a practice of appreciation, which, rather than focus on gratitude, the feeling, the state of it, we can appreciate these things. And that implies an action we can take with respect to these phenomena within our lives. So when we acknowledge the floor, when we recognize, we could say recognize, when we think again that things could be much worse than they are, this actually makes us available for the perception of resources that perhaps we hadn't previously appreciated. This brings to our attention resources that perhaps we could leverage a bit more. These may actually be supports that afford us some more stable footing than perhaps we had recognized before. And you may well find, actually, that some of the reasons why you're not worse off are other animate agents, other people in your life. And by God, I'll tell you, it goes a long way to actually acknowledge and express appreciation for those people. Speaking from personal experience, when everything falls apart, those people may be the only ones who keep you going. They may be the ones on whom your survival depends. So it's worth, at the very least, digging the well before you're thirsty, I think the phrase is. You can acknowledge and appreciate these people in the here and now. You can extend yourself perhaps that little bit. And look, this isn't to say that this just solves all problems. It's not to say that this magically puts you in some positive state of mind. However, what I have found over the years is that this approach to gratitude for skeptics, this consideration of why we're not worse off in the moment, it actually does bring to our attention resources that we could leverage a bit more. Here's what I mean. When you recognize the floor, that also perhaps brings to your attention ways that you can raise the floor. When you recognize why you're not worse off, perhaps you can then begin to explore how it is that you can ensure that the low points in your life are never quite so low. Here's why this is important. Quite often, when we're looking to improve our circumstances, we get caught up in the trap of trying to make our highs higher. We want the best moods even better, or we want even more profit in our business month after month after month. We want to be in better shape and better shape and better shape. But inevitably, there's going to be a point where we kind of reach the limit on what's available. And rather than make the highs higher, if we make the lows not quite so low, if we focus on raising the floor, concept that came to my attention through a guy named Nick Peterson, really worth checking his stuff out. If we raise the floor and make sure that our lows are never quite so low, that means that across time, the rolling averages start to work in our favor. It takes a lot of work to make your highs higher. It takes much less work to make sure that the lows are not quite so low. And again, if you can raise the floor a bit, for example, rather than focusing on having a more profitable month and a more profitable month and a even more profitable month, if you can just eliminate the months where you are in the negative in terms of your cash flow, or if you can eliminate the zeros in your business, overall, across months and the year and years, that rolling average lends itself to you having a much more profitable business. Likewise, if you are looking to improve your body composition across time, you can obsess over having the perfect meal plan, but if you are still crushing a case of beer every weekend, it's like, well, maybe you address that before worrying about an extra serving of leafy greens with dinner on Wednesday. What we want to do is figure out in this, I apologize, it kind of ran a little far afield. I took a diversion there for a moment, but if we can appreciate why we're not worse off, that brings our attention to the existential ground of our life right now. We can then, through our active appreciation of that, the investment of ourselves into that, we can work to raise the floor. And rather than look forward, chasing the rainbows and butterflies and all of that, we can just make it a little less likely that we slip into the pit of hell again and again and again. Hopefully that makes sense. So, in summary, what I want to suggest to you is that rather than go and look for the silver linings, it's probably going to be much easier for you to identify why you're not worse off. Take a thorough inventory, acknowledge it, recognize it, then, and only then, perhaps begin to appreciate these things, to find some increase in these things. And whether that is sending a message of acknowledgement to a good friend, a family member, a loved one, whomever, whether that is just, thanking whomever it is you thank in those moments, that the lights turn on, whether that is finding some quiet moment where you think, for most of human history, this clean water that comes effortlessly out of the tap, that wasn't available to our species. What a miracle. Whatever the case is, again, it doesn't solve all problems, but it can shift us out of what might be a habitually and excessively negative orientation toward our lives. And we can recognize that actually we are perhaps standing on a reasonable foundation that for most of human history was not available to us. You could consider at the very least the circumstances in which you find yourself in now, the circumstances in which you find yourself now. By God, this was a dream of your ancestors. You are a living dream of so many millions of years worth of evolutionary development leading to this moment. And I hope at the very least you can consider that as the ground of your being, that as the background of your life, as a result of which you are now possible. So out of everything that I've talked about here, I'd love to hear if you want to drop in the comments what in this video is the difference that made a difference. What is the one idea that does really seem to have shifted things in terms of your thinking, your feeling, your action in the world? Also, down below in the description of this, I'll put a link to where you can learn more about working together in the Grounded Founder Framework. If that's of some use to you, you can click down below to learn more about that. And well, thanks for your attention. I look forward to talking again soon.